It's, of course, a mistake. It's an understandable sort of mistake in a sprint weekend where it's so much harder to get that stuff right, especially on a bumpy track, but a lesson for us in the future. First of all, a reminder of the skid plate rules and why, in the case of this race, did we get disqualified. That was via a set of things called the skid blocks. And the skid blocks are basically pieces of metal, inserts of metal, little discs of metal that are put into that plank material, which at the end of the race, the skid blocks have to be a guaranteed thickness. They start off the race at 10 millimeters thick. By the time you get to the end of the race, they must be no less than 9. So you are allowed a certain amount of erosion of that skid block by touching the ground, but no more than 1 millimeter. Else, if your car is inspected and found to be below that 9 millimeters, then you will have been deemed to have been running your car too low, and you'll be disqualified. So that is indeed what happened in our case. So does this disqualification mean our upgrades are somehow not working as we anticipated they might? Or is it more to do with the setup of the car and the bumpy track? The weekend was a very cast iron vote of confidence in favour of the stuff we put on the car. It gives us great hope for the races that remain. But was it to do instead with setup and the bumpiness of the track? Yes, it had everything to do with those two things, amplified by the fact that it was a sprint weekend. Normally, in a race weekend, you have 3 untimed sessions, free practice 1, 2, and 3, in which you gradually hone the setup of the car, getting it ready for the qualifying on the Saturday and the race on the Sunday. In that period of practice, what you're trying to do is get the car fast, reliable, and legal, making sure that you're ticking all the boxes that enable the car to get through to the end of the weekend fast and good when you go into Parc Fermé. At a sprint weekend, you are under much more pressure. You have just a solitary hour at the very front of the weekend, free practice 1, where you have to get the car ready for the next session, which is qualifying, the next session, which is sprint shootout, the next session, which is sprint race, and then the race itself. So after that 1 hour, basically you have cast your die. You have chosen your setup, and you have then got to run the rest of the weekend with the bets you've placed in that 1 hour of running. Much less time to assess things than normal, and much less time to make corrective action ahead of the sort of paying sessions later in the weekend. So in Austin, a track which has a very bumpy surface, and therefore, you know, you're a bit more vulnerable to bumping the car on the ground in those bumps, we just simply didn't take enough margin. At the end of free practice 1, when we'd done our setup, we checked the plank, all looked fine, really untouched after that free practice 1 running, but the results of the race speak for themselves. We were illegal at the end of the race, and clearly we should have had our car set a little bit higher up to give ourselves just a little bit more margin. It's, of course, a mistake. It's an understandable sort of mistake in a sprint weekend where it's so much harder to get that stuff right, especially on a bumpy track, but a lesson for us in the future to make sure that we take more margin, especially at a track like that, with all of its bumps. So what was the reason we didn't pit Lewis when Max pitted in order to cover off the undertake that Max subsequently put on us? Well, I'll just preface my answer by saying we should have done. We should have pitted Lewis. We should have kept ahead, and you know, we would have given ourselves a better chance of the win had we done so. But if I can maybe just replay the thinking at the time, you'll maybe understand where we were coming from, and also understand a bit more of the strategist's dilemma. So we had a car that in the morning, when we were discussing the likely performance of the car, the likely trajectory of the race, our thinking was roughly like this. We knew that we had been pretty pacey during the sprint race the day before, but we also knew that Max had just had the edge on us. And Austin being the sort of track where, generally speaking, the track sort of tends to deal out the cars in pace order by the time the checkered flag falls at the end of Sunday, we didn't actually think we were in exactly the same race as Max. We thought he would be able to find a way of coming through the field. That's the first thing, was just in the back of our heads as the laps were playing out in that first stint on the Sunday. The second thing is that when we did our analysis of the circuit and the running of the weekend thus far, we thought that it was most likely a two-stop, most likely a race where the tyre degradation, the amount that you get slower with each passing lap due to the tyres wearing, that the tyre degradation was high enough that it was likely to be a two-stop race. However, we didn't discount the possibility that on race day itself, if the degradation that we saw, if the lap time evolution was actually a bit more favourable, with less loss of lap time with each passing lap, that it might transfer from a two-stop into a one-stop race. So there we are, first stint, going along at a good lick. Clearly able to overtake those two Ferraris, going at a pace that seemed to be on Max's pace broadly, and pretty decent, and a little bit quicker than the McLaren in front of us. So when Max came in for his stop, we knew if we let him do a few laps that he would undercut us. That wasn't a surprise, but we were in that period of optimism where we were looking at the flat lap times Lewis was producing, the fast flat lap times, and thinking this might be on, and we're not going to beat Max just by doing the same thing as him because, you know, he's quicker than us. We saw that yesterday in the sprint race, but if we can make this one stop work, then we could beat him. That was what's going on in our heads. So we didn't cover Max off. We left Lewis out there and waited to see what would happen. And, you know, fingers crossed that flat lap time progression would continue. A lap goes by and we've effectively been undercut. And then we're just fingers crossed to see whether the pace evolves as we hoped. But rather crushingly, within a very short period of time after we'd lost the ability to protect against Max, after a long period of flat lap times with Lewis, his lap times turned south on us and it turned back into the same degradation as everybody else, turning us into a two-stop car along with everybody else, but having surrendered the position to Max in the first instance as a result of that sort of false optimism that we could make this one-stop work. Whereas we perhaps would have been better, we definitely would have been better to cover him off, because actually the raw pace of the car was good enough to compete on equal terms with him, and if we'd just done a two-stopper against his two-stopper, could have been a different race. Why did we put mediums on and not softs after the second pit stop? Well, this is one of the easier questions to answer with some confidence. The tyres that worked best in qualifying were the soft tyres. No doubt about that. Really quick tyres in qualifying. But the tyres that worked best in the race were the mediums, and to a lesser degree, the hards. So if you're going to go and do a race, you don't set off to do it on the softs. You set off to do it as much as you can on the medium, and then use the hard in order to satisfy the rule that you have to use two types of tyre. But you try to avoid the soft at that track because it just doesn't have the performance over a decent race stint. Now, at the time when we made our second stop, I think we had 17 laps left on the race. And although it's possible to go 17 laps on a soft tyre, in fact, Sainz showed that the day before, he did 19 on a soft tyre in the sprint race. But you can't go fast for 17 laps on a soft tyre. And you saw, in fact, Sainz's lap times falling away very rapidly on that soft tyre the day before. So if we were in chase mode, and we were, then our best chance of hounding down first Lando and then Max was by being on the medium tyre, which was the best race tyre on the day. And indeed, that's what we chose, because that gave us our best shot. Didn't quite get Max, easily put Lando to the sword, and perhaps if we'd made just slightly smarter decision around the first stop, then would have been an even more exciting end of the race than it was. How are we feeling as a team after the highs and lows and then lows of the result on Sunday? Well, of course, the disqualification is a significant blow. It's a miserable feeling. It hurts. Everybody here feels it. Everybody would be upset, embarrassed to a degree as well, because we absolutely don't like being the wrong side of the rules, and just lamenting the lost points. So that's the sort of immediate feeling. Give it a day or two and that will start to wane and be replaced by the much happier feeling, which is we moved our car forward this weekend. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do it, but we did it, and we did it by a decent amount. And with 4 races left in the championship, 4 races where I'm pretty sure we will stay the right side of the skid block rules, we will nevertheless have the uplift that we gave to our car. And so the initial feeling of sort of hurt and disappointment and frustration at ourselves will pass to be replaced by the sort of sunny optimism of knowing that the car looked bright on this upgrade package, and we've got 4 more races to show what we can do with it. If we assume that the upgrade package did work decently, and we think it did, what do we expect from the remaining 4 races of the season? Well, they're 4 quite different races. We've got Mexico first, high altitude, thin air track where the asphalt's quite different to the ones we've just been at. And as long as we can keep the car cool there in the thin air of the Mexico track, then I think we'll be pretty decent. Corners ought to suit us and the pace of the car should be good there. Brazil, well, a race that we won last year to our massive pleasure, is a track where, again, all the things we just plonked on the car should pay good dividends for us in the Interlagos track. Then I think we're on to Vegas. Vegas is going to be a bit of an adventure, something of a journey into the unknown. New track, so loads and loads of opportunity to screw up there, but also opportunity to do well if you do your homework well and you prepare nicely. But the particular challenge of Vegas, it's going to be the temperature. It's November, it's the desert, it's a nighttime race. The track and the air temperature is going to be way, way colder than anything we've been used to running an F1 car at in recent seasons. And then finally Abu Dhabi, a sort of more middle of the road sort of track where maybe the upgrade package will do just the sort of season average goodness that we might expect, rather than being biased towards the high-speed end where it's absolutely at its best in a track like Austin. So it will be good for us, but maybe not quite as in the middle of its sweet spot as it was at a high-speed track like Austin. Nevertheless, all 4 races, different in character, and very, very excited to go to them in a season where the points battle between us and Ferrari is pretty tight, and where we would like nothing more than to just sort of have 4 clean and tidy races, and maybe keep our fingers absolutely crossed that in one of those 4 the dice might roll in our favour and perhaps do better than just a podium.